Hello BookTube, this is Lindy. Welcome to Lindy's Magpie Reads. I have read 10 books in the past week. Well, 4 of those were audiobooks, but I think I'm going to divide this into 2. And so 5 books today, 5 books tomorrow, because there's other things to tell you about too. And the most exciting thing is that somebody nominated my front garden for this citywide program that's called Front Yards in Bloom. And I'm just delighted because I know that some people think the front yard is an eyesore. I actually got a notice from the city a few years ago to that effect. Although when the bylaw officer boss came out to look at the garden, he said it was beautiful. So anyway, yeah, so that great thing happened. And I had 2 book clubs. On Monday night was Lesbian Plus book club, and I will be talking about the book that we discussed a little bit later on today. And then on Wednesday I went to the Glass Bookshop in-person book club. We were able to meet outside, so without masks, and it was great. And we were talking about Otessa Moshfegh's Lapvona. Some people loved it, some people didn't. There were a lot of people that were kind of in the middle. Anyway, it made for a very, very interesting discussion. I talked about Lapvona in my last Friday Reads, so you can check that out if you want to know more about my own thoughts. I have been harvesting. Raspberries are in season, and my big raspberry patch is actually behind the garage, and I used up all of my homemade cough syrup. Normally I just use elecampane and honey in my cough syrup, but I decided to do a combination of herbs from my garden, so followed a recipe from the Boreal Herbal by Beverley Gray and substituted elecampane for the coltsfoot because I don't grow that, and I know that elecampane root, it works really well for coughs. That was my project yesterday. Oh, plus yesterday I did a bunch of natural dye stuff while listening to an audiobook, and that's related to my reaction to the Booker long list. I'll save that for tomorrow. So what else for today? Maybe I'll throw in a little bit of video of some wild hares. We have quite a few in Edmonton, and when I was downtown walking to the bookshop and then returning to the bus stop, I saw some hares, and you can see how they can camouflage themselves pretty well in a urban landscape. Oh, and a couple weeks back I saw a leveret. They are so different from baby rabbits because as soon as they're born, they've got their hair, they're ready to go. But it's rare for me to see a little one, so I might throw in that video too. I didn't get too close because I didn't want to scare it off, so you might have to look close to see it. Okay, on to the books. I reread this collection of poetry, The Small Way. The author is Onjana Yawnghwe. She is a Shan Canadian, immigrated to Canada when she was a child, and this book was a gift from my friend Kathy, and I got it in December of 2019, and the story, the poems are all covering a couple of years of the author's experience when her husband, former husband, transitioned to a woman. And one of the things that she writes about is when her former husband was choosing a new name, and decided on Hazel. This kind of was in my mind. Shortly after I read that, I went to Audrey's books and I spotted this book on the shelf. And there is something about the cover, not just that it's the same sort of blue cover, but these illustrations are actually done by Onjana Yawnghwe, and Hazel Jane Plante was formerly married to Onjana. Now this novel has got an experimental form, a little blue encyclopedia for Vivian. It is written in with as if there's an imaginary television show called Little Blue, and the encyclopedia aspect of it is that characters, she writes about different characters going through the alphabet, and through that writes about her connection with another trans woman. So there's two trans women in this novel. One is a lesbian and the other one is straight. They're in many ways very different from each other. But when this novel starts out, the straight one has died. And the other one is grieving. So it's part of the grief process for her to write about Vivian, her friend who died. And it's a quiet little story. And it worked really well for me. I loved the writing, for one thing. You can see all the flags. So Lesbian Plus Book Club discussed this. I mentioned that I bought it in January of 2020. Well, I didn't finally pick it up to read it until just this past week for book club. So sometimes, for no reason at all, you know, books that I buy kind of take the back seat. I'm sure that happens to you too, especially because I borrow a lot from the library, and you know, those take priority. But I'm so glad that I finally got to this, because I enjoyed it very much. It actually won the Lambda Literary Award for Trans Fiction the year it was published, and deservedly so. So if you're in the mood for something kind of unusual, you're looking for something by a trans author, then I do recommend this. And there's illustrations in it that Onjana created for it that really add a lot as well. So that was Little Blue Encyclopedia. I listened to a very long audiobook called An Immense World by Ed Yong. I think it's 14 hours long. And it's the kind of book that is full of really cool facts, you know, that you want to share with people. Did you know that insects have so many different places where they have ears? It could be on their ears, on their knees, on their abdomen, on their antennae, on their throat, hairs in their midsection, the bottoms of their feet. Like the ears could be anywhere. The whole sensory experience for creatures other than humans is just so varied. There are many things that we would probably never have thought of, like how sound affects other creatures and how light affects other creatures. That sensing can be done with magnetic abilities or electric abilities. Radar, sonar, echoes. Very, very cool nonfiction audiobook. That one is read by the author. Now, Ed Yong, he's originally from Malaysia and lives in Britain now. He has a way of speaking where he emphasizes every few words that took some getting used to. It's, you know, not the way a professional audiobook narrator speaks. Also, he speaks a little more quickly than a professional audiobook narrator, so I had to listen to it just on regular speed. I mean, not that that's a hardship, but for a 14-hour audiobook, it's 14 hours of listening instead of my usual 1.25. Oh, let's see, some of the other things that I can remember from that book. The scales that are on a moth's wings, they actually protect them from bats because they muffle they absorb some of the sound and muffle the echo, so it's harder for bats to find them. There's a species of fish that lives in caves that has teeth on the exterior of its entire body that it uses for sensing currents and stuff like that. Teeth, actual teeth, not imitation teeth or something like teeth, actual teeth over its entire body. So yeah, so many cool things. Another audiobook that I listened to, and another long one, this one was 15 hours long. It's a novel called We Measure the Earth with Our Bodies. The author is a Tibetan Canadian. Her name is Tsering Yangzom Lama. And the novel follows 3 generations in one family, the women in one family. So starting in about 1960, so the Chinese have invaded Tibet, and this family is forced to flee their village over the mountains. Not everybody survives, huge hardships just to get to safety. And we have 3 different voices as part of the narrative, and the audiobook has 3 different narrators, so that worked really nicely. I will put in the notes down below who the audiobook narrators are, if that's important to you. I just want to say it is very good production. So it's an immersive story. A lot of it is set in a refugee camp in Nepal. But the youngest in that family, so granddaughter, Dolma, she ends up studying at university in Toronto, and it's there that she sees in a private collection a sacred artifact that she recognizes as being from their village. So there's a good plot aspect to it, as well as very vivid setting and evocation of what life is like for Tibetan refugees. The author is she said she's been an activist since she was a child. Tibetans are fighting for the freedom to return to their homeland and freedom from Chinese oppression. So this was a novel portraying a refugee situation that I hadn't felt so deeply before, and yeah, I really felt for these people so much. Very well done. And last off, I'm going to tell you about this short novel, Prophetess, and the author is Baharan Baniahmadi. She's a actor, author, and playwright from Iran, now lives in Canada. And this is an odd little novel, sort of allegorical. We start out with Sarah at 7 years old, living in the slums in Tehran, and follow her into her young adulthood. So when she's 7, she witnesses her older sister being murdered. Her sister's 9. And Sarah loses the ability to speak at that point. She's very traumatized, and the most unusual thing that happens to her is when men come close to her, she tends to faint and sprout facial hair. And she starts to encompass other women's voices inside her that are talking to her. So, yeah, if that intrigues you, I recommend this. I was surprised at how good it is. A story about how we deal with trauma, how we move forward. And it's definitely in contemporary times. Social media is part of the novel. Yeah, it was 4 stars for me. And let me know if you've read that or any of the other books that I've talked about today. And come back tomorrow for Saturday Reads for the second half of what I've read in the past week. Thank you so much for watching.